The air inside the Tower of London is colder than you expect. You smell it before you hear it: iron, damp stone, and the faintest trace of something metallic that clings to your tongue. It is not the clean tang of fresh blood, but the stale residue of lives ended here before. Ahead, through the narrow slit of morning light, you see her, a small figure in a gray damask gown. Kneeling in prayer, the linen coif hides most of her hair, but not her eyes, steady, fixed on something beyond you. Outside, a wooden scaffold waits, the grain already darkened from older stains. Somewhere beyond, the executioner's blade rests in the straw, hidden from her sight but not from yours. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you're about to remember may never leave you again. If you choose to remain here, if you choose to watch, know that these are the last moments of a Queen of England. Every sound, every step, every breath you will hear is drawn from the surviving records of that day. If you value history as it truly happened, subscribe. If you believe the dead still speak through stone and ink, like this, then stay. Like, share, but only if you want to remember her. Because once you do, you may never forget. It is the morning of the 19th of May, 1536. London. The Tudor court has never been more divided, and the air in the city is thick with rumor. Only 3 years earlier, Anne Boleyn had been crowned queen. Her marriage to Henry VIII, the spark that severed England from the Catholic Church. Now, in less than an hour, she will die by the sword. You are inside the Tower of London, not as a prisoner, but as one of the small number permitted to witness the execution, part courtier, part chronicler. You are here not by choice, but by royal summons. The king himself will not attend. He has already moved on to the thought of another bride. Jane Seymour. The Queen's fate has been sealed by a trial that lasted barely 2 days. The charges, adultery, incest, high treason, are crimes for which the penalty is death. The Tower this morning is quieter than usual. The Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, has followed the King's instruction to make her end honorable and discreet. That is why the block will not be used. Instead, a swordsman from Calais has been brought, renowned for his speed and precision. Able to sever a head with a single stroke. It is meant to be merciful. Anne herself has been kept in the Queen's lodgings, part of the former royal palace inside the tower's walls, rather than in the damp cells used for common criminals. Over the past days, Kingston has reported her words and behavior to Thomas Cromwell and, by extension, to the king. Those reports, still preserved, describe her as alternately calm, laughing, and devout in prayer. Outside the tower walls, the city stirs. The Thames carries the muted sounds of barges and the creak of oars. In the streets, people speculate in hushed voices. Many believe her downfall was inevitable. Others whisper of false charges, of the king's cold ambition. Inside, you note the details. The scaffold has been built on the north side of the White Tower, near the old Coldharbour Gate. It is covered in fresh straw, not to comfort the condemned, but to absorb the blood. A black draped coffin waits nearby. The witnesses are few: nobles, selected officials, and a small detachment of yeomen of the guard in their red and gold livery. They stand apart from one another, as if proximity might carry guilt. The Queen will die in private, at the king's order, but the manner of her death will be spoken of for centuries. The records of chroniclers like Edward Hall and Charles Wriothesley, and the letters of ambassadors such as Eustace Chappies, will preserve each detail, not for her dignity, but for the precision of political history. You will stand here for all of it, from the moment she steps out of her chambers to the instant her eyes see nothing. The morning breaks pale and cool over the Tower of London. From your place near the outer door of the Queen's lodgings, you hear the faint murmur of voices within. The thick stone walls carry sounds strangely softened, yet distinct enough to make out the rhythm of prayer. It is the litany, in English. her voice low but steady. Sir William Kingston stands nearby, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the door as if guarding not the woman inside, but the solemnity of the moment. It is just past 8 o'clock when the door opens. She emerges, accompanied by 2 attendants, Margaret Wyatt, Lady Lee, and her gentlewoman, Mrs. Orchard. She wears a gown of grey damask trimmed with fur, a crimson kirtle beneath. Over her head is a linen coif, the fabric smooth against her temples, concealing her dark hair. She carries no rosary, no book, only her composure. You note her face, pale, but not gaunt. The past weeks in confinement have not hollowed her as you expected. Perhaps it is the careful diet, perhaps the stubbornness for which she was once admired and feared. She looks first at Kingston, offers a small smile, and says, "Master Kingston, I hear I shall not die afore noon, and I am sorry therefore, for I thought to be dead by this time and past my pain." Her voice is quiet, without tremor. The words are recorded later in Kingston's letters to Thomas Cromwell. There is no sign of the Queen's old sharpness, only a directness that seems to steady those around her. Kingston assures her the time is near. She nods once and gestures that she is ready. Outside, the sky is clear but the air sharp enough to raise the small hairs on your neck. The procession is small, just the Queen, her 2 ladies, Kingston, and a handful of guards. The space between the Queen's lodgings and the scaffold is not far. Yet the steps feel drawn out. The sound of her gown brushing the damp ground is the loudest thing you hear. Until a rook's cry breaks overhead. You notice her eyes move not to the crowd but to the ground before her. This is no public execution. Perhaps 50 stand near the scaffold. All of rank, no commoners press forward, no merchants crane their necks for a glimpse. The king has ordered it so. The scaffold itself is built of fresh timber. The smell of resin still faint in the morning air, though beneath it is the older scent, iron tang, soaked into the grain from other deaths. At the base of the scaffold, she pauses. The 2 ladies follow her up the short wooden steps, their skirts lifting to avoid the straw scattered there. The yeomen of the guard stand at the corners, their halberds upright, faces impassive. The executioner is not yet in view. He waits beyond the edge, as is custom, to avoid the condemned's gaze until the final moment. You move to one side, close enough to see the fibers in the straw. Some are still green from the spring cut, others are stained dark at the tips. The coffin, lined with black cloth, rests near the far side. It is plain, with no carving or ornament, its purpose too immediate for embellishment. Anne stands at the center of the platform. She faces east, toward the tower chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, where she will be buried before the day is over. Kingston steps forward to ask if she wishes to speak. She does. Her voice carries in the morning stillness. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, according to law, for by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused, and condemned to die, but I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor more merciful prince was there never." The words are familiar to you from later chroniclers, but hearing them here is different. There is no weeping in her tone, no bitterness, only the deliberate pace of one who has rehearsed each syllable. She ends with a request for prayers, "And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all. And I heartily desire you all to pray for me." Her ladies move to her sides. Together, they help her remove the coif and tuck her hair beneath a linen cap, so it will not impede the blade. She kneels, not before a block, there is none, but on the straw itself. This is the French method. Her hands are clasped in front of her, her head remains upright. The executioner steps forward now, a tall man in a simple dark tunic. No mask. In his hands, a sword of slender blade, longer than a man's arm. He bows to her, speaks briefly in French, assuring her of a swift death. Kingston has arranged this, so that her last moments will be marked by courtesy. Not the spectacle of an axeman's swing. Her ladies kneel beside her, weeping now, but muffling the sound in their hands. The executioner moves to his place. You feel the sudden press of silence, the kind that seems to thicken the air. He signals to an assistant, who steps forward and distracts her briefly by pointing to something beyond the scaffold. She turns her head slightly. It is in that instant the blade moves. There is no raised arc, no heavy swing, only the clean, horizontal cut of steel through flesh and sinew. The sound is brief, almost soft, but the body folds forward in a way that leaves no doubt. Her head falls into the straw, the lips parted slightly, eyes open. The smell comes almost immediately, iron and warm air. Her ladies move quickly, covering the head with a white cloth. The body is lifted toward the coffin, the gown's crimson kirtle already darkening where the blood seeps. The straw beneath is trampled and matted, its green blades now streaked red. No one speaks. Kingston gives a short nod, and the yeomen stand aside to allow the coffin to be carried toward the chapel. You remain where you are for a moment longer, the image fixed in the cold clarity of the morning light. The scaffold is empty now, except for the trampled straw and the faint steam that rises in the cool air where her blood fell. You remain standing for a moment longer, aware that others have already begun to disperse. There is no proclamation, no formal dismissal. Each witness knows when to turn away. Yet your eyes stay fixed on the coffin as it moves slowly toward the chapel. The coffin is carried not by professional bearers but by members of the yeomen of the guard. Their pace is measured, deliberate, the timber creaking with each step. The box is plain, of elm wood, lined with coarse cloth. There is no royal emblem, no gilded trim, just the black pall draped loosely over the lid, shifting slightly in the breeze. Beneath that cloth lies what was, until minutes ago, the Queen of England. The path to St. Peter ad Vincula runs along the inner ward, past weathered stone walls and narrow windows that have looked down on countless condemned. The chapel itself is small, almost modest, set close to the scaffold site so the journey is short. As you follow, the air is heavy with the mingled scents of cold stone, damp straw, and the faint metallic tang that seems to cling to your skin no matter how you breathe. At the chapel entrance, the coffin is set down. Kingston speaks briefly to the priest waiting inside. Drive. John Skip, once her chaplain. There is no grand procession, no tolling bells, only a brief murmur of Latin prayers. The interior of the chapel is dim, the light filtering through narrow lancet windows. You notice the worn flagstones beneath your feet, some darker where years of damp have settled in. A shallow grave has been prepared before the altar, close to where other prisoners of state lie. There is no carved monument for her, no place marked with her name, only space enough for the coffin to rest. The earth here is mixed with fragments of old burials, bone splinters and soil indistinguishable. In this place, rank and title mean little. All are brought low beneath the same stones. As the coffin is lowered, the cloth shifts. For a fraction of a moment, you see inside, the white of the linen wrappings, hastily arranged, and the edge of a pale hand, fingers slightly curled. One of the guards adjusts the pall quickly, as though to seal away the sight. The priest begins the commendation. Requiem aeternam dona e Domini. His voice is steady, the Latin syllables precise, though there is an echo in the small chamber that seems to magnify each phrase. Around you, there are only a handful of figures, the two ladies who attended her to the end. Their veils drawn low, Kingston, standing rigid, and a clerk who records the time and place for the official ledger. The king will not see this, nor will the court. For him, the matter is already finished. By evening, he will dine with Jane Seymour. The soil is shoveled back with muted thuds. The sound is unlike the hollow ring of a deeper grave. Here, it is flat and quick. The men work without pause, as though eager to complete the task. When the last clod is tamped down, the surface is smoothed and left bare. There will be no marker until the chapel floor is later paved over. And then her resting place will be hidden beneath the same stones walked upon by wardens, guards, and visitors. You step back, aware of how quickly silence reclaims the space. The chapel smells of wax and damp wool, the faint residue of candle smoke lingering near the altar. Outside, the sun has risen higher, casting sharper light over the tower grounds. The scaffold still stands, but the straw has been gathered into a heap and will soon be burned. The executioner has already gone. As you walk away from the chapel, you pass the Queen's lodgings again. The windows are closed, the rooms inside already being cleared for the next occupant. The air here feels different now, emptier, as though the walls themselves have absorbed the weight of the morning. Somewhere beyond, in the city, the news will begin to spread. Merchants will pause in their trade to speak of it. Courtiers will measure their words in private chambers. Chroniclers will set ink to parchment, preserving what they can of the details. But here, within the tower, it is simply over. The space she occupied has been filled by silence. The people who stood beside you on the scaffold platform will not speak of it again in your hearing. You are left with the image of her final moments, the turn of her head, the swift arc of the blade, the fall into straw, and now, the unmarked grave. As you reach the gate, you look back one last time. The white tower looms against the sky, its pale walls indifferent to what they have witnessed. The chapel is almost hidden from view, tucked into the inner ward, its modest size belying the weight of history it holds. Somewhere beneath its stones, the Queen lies as countless others do, nameless in death, remembered only in the records kept by those who saw. By the time you leave the tower and cross into the city, the sound of the river is louder than anything else, the splash of oars, the slow churn of water against the stone embankment. Yet even here, you can sense the shift in the air. The execution was private, but word moves faster than water on the Thames. Within an hour, London will know. The streets beyond the tower gates are already busy. Merchants call out prices for early trade. The smell of baking bread mixes with the sharper tang of fish stalls along the riverside. But the voices you pass are lowered, words shortened to avoid the notice of strangers. It is done, one man mutters as you walk by. Another, older, shakes his head and says nothing, only crossing himself in silence. By mid-morning, the first of the foreign envoys are writing. In a chamber not far from the royal palace at Greenwich, Eustace Chappies, ambassador of the Holy Roman Empire, takes quill to paper. His dispatch to Emperor Charles V is brisk, clinical. The Queen of England has been executed by sword at the Tower. Her demeanor, uncommonly cheerful, given her fate. He notes her words to the crowd, her request for prayers, the swiftness of the death. The report is sealed, marked urgent, and placed into the hands of a trusted courier bound for the coast. Elsewhere in the city, other accounts begin to form. Edward Hall, the chronicler, will later write of her constant bearing, noting the precision of the Frenchman's stroke. In Wriothesley's chronicle, the tone is more somber, acknowledging her as the Queen, even in death. These records do not speak of innocence or guilt, they simply fix her in time. At the scaffold, on the 19th day of May in the 28th year of Henry's reign, you stop in at a small tavern near Eastcheap. The hearth is cold, but the place is full. Men lean in close over their cups, their words tumbling in whispers. Some speak of justice, how the king has rid himself of a troublesome wife and cleared the way for a new marriage. Others, less certain, murmur about false charges, about the speed of the trial and the lack of evidence. A few recall how quickly Queen Catherine had been cast aside. And now, How swiftly Anne herself has fallen. Outside, apprentices and porters move between shops, their eyes catching yours as if to measure whether you have seen what they have only heard. In their expressions, you see a mixture of fear and fascination. Public executions are nothing new in London. But this one is different. It is not the hanging of a thief at Tyburn, nor the burning of a heretic at Smithfield. This is the beheading of a crowned queen, something that will be spoken of in generations to come. By noon, bells ring from the city's churches, not for mourning, but for the usual hours of prayer. Still, the sound seems altered today, heavier in the ear. The sky remains clear, the sun sharp on the river's surface. Somewhere upriver, the royal barge lies ready to carry the king to his hunting lodge. Far from the tower's walls, he will not look back. Messages move beyond England with startling speed. At the French court, the news is received with careful formality. King Francis I, who once welcomed Anne as the king's intended bride, now hears of her execution from his own envoys. In Rome, the papal court will interpret her death as divine judgment for the schism with the Church. And in the courts of Europe, noblewomen take note. The crown offers no shield when favor is lost. You walk along Cheapside, the main artery of the city. Stalls selling cloth and spices give way to goldsmiths' shops, their windows glinting in the afternoon light. The chatter here is more open, the details embroidered with each retelling. Some say she confessed before the blade fell. Others that she cursed the king under her breath. You know neither is true, but the truth is already dissolving into rumor. History will keep the written accounts, the people will keep the stories they prefer. Near St. Paul's, a preacher mounts the outdoor pulpit. His voice is loud enough to carry over the crowd, speaking not directly of the Queen, but of the wages of sin and the certainty of God's judgment. Those gathered nod, murmur assent, but you can see in their eyes that the sermon is just a frame. They're here for the unspoken news beneath it. Late in the day, you find yourself near the river again, watching barges push toward the open sea. One carries the imperial courier, his packet sealed with black wax. In weeks, it will be read aloud in distant halls, the ink still fresh with the details you saw with your own eyes. You imagine how it will sound when spoken to men and women who never saw the tower, who never smelled the straw or heard the quiet thud of soil on a coffin lid. And yet, even across the water, the image will be clear enough, a queen on her knees, a sword's flash, and the silence that follows. These are the kinds of moments that pass from witness to page, from page to memory, until they become part of the architecture of history itself. As dusk approaches, the city's noise softens. Candles are lit in windows, their glow reflected in the darkening Thames. Somewhere within the tower, the scaffold remains standing, though by morning it will be dismantled, its timbers reused, its straw gone to ash. The grave in St. Peter ad Vincula will lie untouched, unmarked, beneath the stones trodden by guards and priests. No flowers will be laid there, no prayers will be said aloud in her name. You turn away from the river, the day's last light catching on the rooftops ahead. The city moves on, its markets, its courts, its alleys, all of it folding the morning's execution into the fabric of daily life. Only you, and those few who stood inside the tower, will carry the unsoftened memory of what happened. The rest will inherit only the version shaped by distance, by ink, and by time. The morning after Anne Boleyn's execution, London wakes to a city that feels curiously unchanged. The markets open, the bells toll for daily mass, barges cut their slow lines through the Thames. Yet within the court, the air is sharpened with something else: movement, decisions, and the unmistakable scent of a new order settling into place. You are summoned to Whitehall Palace, though the king is not in residence. Henry VIII has already departed for Wolf Hall in Wiltshire, the Seymour family's seat. The journey began within 24 hours of Anne's death. There is no period of mourning. No official proclamation of loss. Instead, the royal party moves swiftly toward a marriage that will rewrite the court's hierarchy again. In the palace, courtiers speak in careful tones. Some, who had shifted allegiance to Jane Seymour weeks earlier, move with a quiet confidence, their positions already secured. Others, once loyal to Anne, now keep their distance from anything that might tie them to her memory. The chambers she once occupied are being cleared, tapestries removed, personal belongings inventoried, her emblems, the crowned falcon and the entwined initials H and A are being taken down from walls and ceilings. Even the motto she favored, "The Most Happy," will soon be painted over. You recall that only weeks earlier, these same rooms had echoed with her laughter and sharp conversation. Now, the silence is almost surgical, as though her presence has been excised from the building itself. This is the nature of Tudor politics, swift removal, no trace left behind. Meanwhile, the machinery of diplomacy moves on. Letters are dispatched to foreign courts announcing not just her execution, but the king's freedom to marry again. The wording is deliberate, framing the beheading not as tragedy but as a necessary act of justice. In these letters, the charges of adultery, incest, and treason are stated plainly, though the trials had offered little in the way of concrete proof. For allies abroad, it is enough that the king declares it so. In London, the people's attention is already shifting. News of the upcoming marriage to Jane Seymour spreads through taverns and marketplaces. Jane is known to many as the quiet, pale lady who once served Queen Catherine and later Anne herself. Her reputation is one of modesty and obedience, qualities the king now openly values. Contrasting them with Anne's ambition and outspokenness, you hear the first public celebrations by the end of May. On the 30th of May 1536, Henry marries Jane Seymour in a private ceremony at Whitehall. The timing is not lost on anyone, just 11 days after Anne's execution. Chroniclers will record the date with understated precision, but in whispered conversation it is a detail heavy with meaning. In the weeks that follow, Jane begins her formal entry into queenship. Her household is established, her coat of arms prepared. She makes no public statement about Anne, though her position is built entirely on the other woman's downfall. Courtiers adjust their loyalties accordingly. Those who had once flattered Anne now praise Jane's gentleness, her ability to soothe the king's temper. Beyond the court, the political ripples spread further. In Rome, Pope Paul III sees the event as confirmation of Henry's instability and the moral corruption of the English court. In the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V's advisors weigh the potential for alliance or conflict, calculating the value of a new queen with no strong foreign ties. In France, Francis I remains cautious. His daughter-in-law's position must be secure before any further diplomacy is risked. Inside the Tower, where you stood on the morning of the 19th of May, the changes are visible. The scaffold has been dismantled, the ground leveled. The Queen's lodgings are reassigned to another high-ranking prisoner. Only the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula retains the memory, though her grave remains unmarked, indistinguishable from those of lesser-known victims. In your own mind, the speed of it all is disorienting. Less than a fortnight separates her final walk across the Tower Green from the king's new marriage vows. The transition is presented to the public as natural, even necessary. A king must have a wife. A queen must be beyond reproach. The fact that one life had to end for another to begin is left unspoken. Though everyone understands it, by midsummer, the court speaks less of Anne except when her fate serves as a warning. Ambitious courtiers, particularly women, are reminded of the danger of overreaching the king's favor. Men recall how swiftly her allies were brought down alongside her, 5 executed for adultery and treason. Their names already fading from public talk. Yet for all the silence, the image remains vivid for you. The gray damask gown, the white cap pulled over her hair, the Frenchman's swift blade, and as the months pass, you begin to understand that the erasure is part of the punishment. Her name will be absent from official prayers, her likeness removed from tapestries, her badges stripped from royal buildings. Even in death, her presence must be dismantled. Still, some will remember, in whispered accounts passed between ladies at court, in the private letters of those who once served her, and in the guarded lines of foreign correspondence, her last moments will be preserved. And for those who witnessed them, those like you, the memory is not something written on paper, but something that clings to the senses. The smell of straw, the press of silence before the cut, the sudden absence where a living person had been. By the year's end, Jane Seymour is firmly established as queen. The court turns its gaze forward, toward the promise of an heir. Henry is seen in public with renewed energy, his temper softened for a time. The past is not discussed, except in the guarded language of political necessity. And so Anne's story, at least in the official record, ends. But for you, and for anyone who stood on that scaffold platform, the final hours are fixed. Not in the ink of proclamations, but in the unyielding clarity of memory. Months pass, and the ripples from the 19th of May 1536 do not fade, they deepen. Within the court, Anne Boleyn's name becomes something you do not speak aloud unless you measure the room first. It is not forbidden, exactly, but it hangs in the air with danger attached. For the king, she is already in the past. For others, she is a reminder of how swiftly favor can turn to fatal judgment. You hear her name most often from foreign visitors, diplomats who still carry letters describing her execution. They speak of it as a curiosity, a warning, even a marvel, how a queen of England, crowned and anointed, could be put to death so quickly. Some compare it to the fate of queens in history past, noting that in England such a thing had not happened before. To them, the French executioner's sword, rather than the English axe, is a detail that speaks of unusual mercy, even elegance, though you cannot forget how swiftly that mercy worked. Within London, her downfall becomes a kind of political parable. Preachers invoke her story to warn against pride, ambition, and disobedience to the husband's will, though in truth, the sermons are aimed at the ears of all who might challenge authority, not just wives. At the same time, quiet sympathy survives in certain quarters, among former servants of Queen Catherine, who see Anne's end as a deserved punishment, and among those who suspect the charges against her were built for the king's convenience. These are not debates carried openly, they slip between trusted friends in guarded conversation. The Tower of London absorbs her into its long history. Visitors from the shires or from abroad are sometimes shown the place where the scaffold stood, the chapel where she lies. The guides, warders in their red and gold, speak of her with practiced neutrality, offering dates and names without judgment. Over time, the exact spot of her grave fades from memory. The chapel floor is repaved. Her bones will rest under stone for centuries without a marker. In the royal lineage, her presence is erased as much as possible, yet she cannot be removed entirely. Her daughter, Elizabeth, remains in the line of succession. Though stripped of legitimacy by parliamentary act, you note that those who serve the young princess tread carefully, knowing her mother's fate. Still, there is a quiet resilience in the girl's survival, a living reminder that Anne's blood still flows in Tudor veins. Beyond England, her death takes on a different shape. In France, she is remembered as the woman who brought French elegance to the English court, only to be undone by it. In Rome, her execution is used to reinforce the dangers of breaking with the Catholic Church. In the courts of Europe, she becomes both a cautionary tale and a political example, a queen whose marriage changed the course of a kingdom, and whose death sealed that change. You read some of these accounts years later, in letters and chronicles. They vary in tone but agree on certain points: the swiftness of her death, the composure she displayed, the unusual choice of the sword. That final detail, repeated over and over, becomes almost symbolic, her life and reign cut cleanly, sharply, without the messy spectacle of an axe. In truth, the effect is the same. But in memory, the sword makes her end seem both foreign and deliberate. In private recollection, other details survive: the gray damask gown, the white cap drawn low, the moment her head turned at the executioner's ruse, the faint hiss of the blade. These are not the things that make it into official chronicles. Yet they live in the minds of those who were there. For you, they are sharper than anything written afterward. Years pass. Jane Seymour gives Henry the son he wanted but dies soon after childbirth. 2 more wives will be crowned, and one, Catherine Howard, will meet a death much like Anne's. Each time, the memory of that May morning returns, as if the scaffold has been rebuilt in your mind. You know the steps, the feel of the air, the silence before the end. In the reign of Elizabeth I, Anne's daughter, her memory is partly restored. The Queen orders the preservation of certain portraits and tokens, ensuring her mother is remembered not only as a condemned traitor but as a rightful queen. Even then, the manner of her death remains a shadow behind the public image, shaping the perception of Tudor queenship for generations. By the time chroniclers of the next century write of her, Anne has become a figure both tragic and dangerous, a woman who rose higher than many believed possible and paid with her life. Her execution is no longer just an event, it is a story, retold in taverns, books, and whispered confidences, reshaped to suit the teller's purpose. Yet for you, it is not a story. It is a memory, fixed and unsoftened. And so the legacy endures, in stone, in ink, in the invisible line between favor and ruin. Her grave remains beneath the chapel floor, marked only in the minds of those who know where to look. You think of it each time you pass the tower, each time you hear the bells of St. Peter ad Vincula. Beneath the quiet hum of London life, she is still there, unchanged, as she was in the hour you last saw her. Centuries pass before the earth beneath St. Peter ad Vincula is disturbed again. The chapel stands quietly within the tower walls, its floor repaved and repainted more than once, the graves beneath it hidden from all but the official records. By the 19th century, the exact location of Anne Boleyn's burial is uncertain even to the warders who guide visitors. Her name is spoken often by tourists, but the place where her remains lie is a matter of speculation. In 1876, during a renovation of the chapel ordered by Queen Victoria, the floor is lifted and the graves examined. You are not there, but the records of Dr. Frederick Mowat, the surgeon overseeing the work, make the scene vivid. Beneath the stone near the altar, a leaden coffin is found. Inside, the skeletal remains of a woman, small in stature, the bones delicate, the skull is almost entirely absent, the jawbone missing, as if removed long before. Measurements are taken, notes compared to contemporary accounts of Anne's appearance: slender build, long neck, small frame. Dr. Mowat reports that the remains likely belong to her. Yet the identification is not absolute. In 3 centuries, the grave has been moved, disturbed, perhaps altered. Some scholars accept the finding, others question it, pointing to discrepancies in the position and arrangement of the bones. The remains are placed back into the earth, now in a coffin lined with oak, and the spot is marked with a simple inscription: Queen Anne Boleyn, consort of King Henry VIII, beheaded the 19th of May 1536. For the first time since her death, her grave bears her name. The reassessment of her final hours begins long before this discovery. But the 19th century brings a new tone. Historians now work from a wider range of sources: trial records, ambassadorial dispatches, the letters of Sir William Kingston, the accounts of chroniclers like Hall and Wriothesley. They note the absence of concrete evidence for the charges against her. They analyze the speed of her arrest, the orchestration of the trial, the political necessity of her removal. Many conclude what her supporters whispered in 1536, that her execution was not the product of proven guilt, but of the king's determination to replace her. Still, the reassessment is careful. Victorian historians frame her as a victim of ambition, her own and others. They dwell on her beauty, her wit, her religious influence, while treating the events of the 19th of May with a kind of restrained melancholy. The execution itself is described in the measured terms of the chroniclers: the prayer, the speech, the swift cut of the French sword. In the 20th century, scholars widen the lens further. They examine her role in the English Reformation, her influence on the king's religious policies, her patronage of reformist scholars. They also turn a sharper eye to the personal and political networks that shaped her rise and fall. Historians like Eric Ives and Alison Weir revisit the scene you witnessed, scrutinizing each detail against the records: the color of her gown, the presence of her ladies, the absence of the block. The result is a portrait both more complex and more human. Public memory of her final hours changes again with the rise of mass media. In paintings, plays, and later in films and television, Anne's death is staged with heightened drama, crowds that were never there, speeches that never passed her lips, even imagined farewells to her daughter. These images, repeated often enough, blur with the documented facts. For those who saw it in truth, the simplicity of the real moment, the small gathering, the bare scaffold, the clean strike, would seem almost understated by comparison. And yet, even in this modern reshaping, certain elements survive unchanged. The choice of the sword remains distinctive. The presence of her ladies, shielding her head from the crowd's gaze, endures in every telling. The direction she faced, toward the chapel where she would be buried, becomes symbolic in hindsight, though it was likely a matter of space and custom. Today, visitors to the tower can stand on the spot marked for her execution and walk into St. Peter ad Vincula to see the stone that bears her name. They can read the inscription and imagine the morning you witnessed. The air inside the chapel is still cool, the light still narrow. The floor you stood upon has been relaid, but beneath it the earth holds what remains of her. The historical reassessment has not undone the fact of her death, nor softened the finality of that moment, but it has shifted her place in memory, from condemned traitor to a queen whose fall was shaped by politics, religion, and the will of a king. The terror before the blade is still there, in the records and in the minds of those who picture it. But it now exists alongside a recognition of her life's breadth, her influence, her intelligence, her survival for 3 years in the most dangerous place in England. As you leave the tower in the present day, you see tourists pause before her memorial. Some whisper to each other, some take photographs, some simply stand in silence. None of them can smell the straw or hear the rook's cry that you remember. But they are part of the same chain of witnesses, and as long as that chain holds, the morning of the 19th of May 1536 will not vanish into silence. The tower is quieter now. The tourists have gone, the yeoman warders have locked the gates, and the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula is empty but for the faint scent of wax and stone. The memorial plaque bearing her name rests flush with the floor, its lettering catching only the softest edge of the evening light. You stand over it, and you are aware that beneath this exact spot lies the coffin lowered into the earth in 1876, the same earth that closed over her in 1536. You have carried the memory of that day through centuries, though now the memory has been softened for public view. The truth you saw was not dressed in ceremony or romance. It was the stillness before the blade, the sudden violence, and the clean absence that followed. It was a small gathering of chosen witnesses, the smell of resin in the scaffold's wood, the quiet scrape of a coffin across chapel stones. Here, in the quiet, the separation between past and present feels thinner. The world beyond the tower's walls moves on. London's traffic hums. Lights blink from glass towers on the skyline, but under this roof, The floor remembers. Every step carries the faint echo of those who came here unwillingly. Their lives reduced to the brief walk from chamber to scaffold. Anne Boleyn was one of them, though she wore a crown before she wore the coif and linen cap. Her death was political, its necessity argued in letters and proclamations. Yet no matter the justification, the act itself, the kneeling, the cut, the burial, was entirely human. Bone, flesh, breath, and silence, and in that, she was no different from any of the hundreds buried here. The difference lies only in what history chose to remember. In the centuries since, her image has shifted. Temptress, reformer, victim, queen, each generation reshapes her, searching in her story for warnings or vindication. The records of her final hours remain brief, precise, and coldly factual. But standing here, you know there is something those records cannot carry. They cannot hold the chill of that morning. The way the air seemed to resist movement. The way the sound of her gown brushing against the damp ground felt louder than the murmurs of the assembled crowd. Her grave, once unmarked, now bears her name. It is a concession to the persistence of memory, a recognition that erasure does not hold forever. Yet even here, the stone says only the barest facts: her name, her title, her death. It does not say why. That question, why she died, why so quickly, why in that place, remains a matter of interpretation. A reminder that history's truth is rarely simple. You step back from the plaque and let your eyes follow the line of the chapel floor toward the altar. The worn stones reflect centuries of footfall. Above them, the narrow windows admit a fading light that touches both the living and the dead. You think of the irony. Anne Boleyn's death helped make possible the birth of the daughter who would one day become Elizabeth I, one of England's most powerful monarchs. The blade that ended the mother's life did not erase her blood from the crown. In a way, her legacy walked out of this chapel in her daughter's veins. Outside, the sun has almost set. The last light catches the pale walls of the White Tower, the same walls that looked down on her final walk. Soon, night will fold over the fortress, and the voices of the day will fade to the low hum of wind over stone. Power, beauty, ambition, none of it lasts. Wealth and title cannot hold back the moment when a person becomes only a name. And then, sometimes, not even that, time does not care for crowns. It swallows all of it, the gold, the oaths, the scaffold, until what remains is only the memory carried by those who choose to remember. And you have remembered. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness.